I would argue you're concerned that murder or killing someone as a military figure is wrong because it's the ending of a human life. Okay, but then the obvious next question is, well, why is human life valuable? And you see, sir, if there is no God, human life is a crapshoot. Human life is ultimately insignificant, except in the way that I give it significance. Well, that's great. But what happens if I'm a white racist? What happens if I'm an intellectual snob? And I say, I'm more intelligent than you are, so I'm more valuable or significant than you are. And if there is no God, my opinion is just as valuable and accurate as your opinion. And your opinion is just as accurate and valuable as my opinion. And if we contradict each other, we got to realize it's all relative. So it really doesn't matter what we say and what we believe. In fact, to have a conversation where we disagree is really a waste of time because everything, baby, is relative. No.
So I grew up Catholic and I'm leaning towards Christian faith, but going to Catholic church, you always see the crucifix, and I've been told it's wrong to make Jesus an image. But I see a lot of images of Jesus, and I've been told it's wrong, and I've been told it's right. So I'm just confused, and I want to know your perspective on that.
What's the number one most recognized symbol worldwide? Now, if it was an electric chair hanging around somebody's neck, would it hold the same worth and value? No, I don't believe so, unless that person didn't just die for you, but died for the entire world, sins of the whole world. And so I think it's interesting where if it's a remembrance of what Jesus did for us, and that ultimately he defeated sin and will defeat death at the end of time, then I'm all about it. If it just becomes a ritualistic thing like I see MLB players do in the outfield right before the first pitch, where it's kissing the cross and that sort of thing, that's not sinful, but it sort of empties the cross of its power in some ways. Remember, we get the word groan from those who were carrying their crosses in the streets, who the Romans were making them carry those crosses to their destinations of when they would hang on those very crosses. And it was known, you could hear throughout the entire city, men, women groaning on crosses. I mean, it was loud, louder than you can imagine. Thank you, Dan. Louder than you can imagine in terms of the pain of it all. So I would just say the cross is obviously the central piece of our entire Christian faith. Take it very seriously and don't take it ritualistically or somehow it's like it's just a good luck charm. But also look to it as, yes, it's death and pain. Jesus was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief and pain, and yet he points to the greatest eternity imaginable, where every single tear will be wiped away from every eye.
So I joined the military a couple years ago as an infantryman.
Thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you. And so I kind of asked how, so our main objective is to close in and destroy Yemen. And I was kind of wondering how that contradicts Christianity and just the rules of God.
Followers of Christ disagree. Some followers of Christ are pacifists. An excellent example of that is one of the most conservative groups of Christians in America, the Amish. The Amish are total pacifists. No police officer is going to carry a gun in this community, and we do not support military. Why? Because we take the teaching of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. And we apply it to civil morality, no violence, force of any kind. Other followers of Christ, myself included, emphasize the fact that we are all sinful human beings. And in Romans chapter 13, the Apostle Paul writes that the government does not bear the sword in vain. I would argue that if you and I go into a restaurant here in San Marcos, and while we're in there, a guy takes out a gun and starts blowing people away. If you hit the guy high and I hit him low and we break his neck in the process, that's not murder. That's killing motivated to protect the innocent from being slaughtered. And I would argue that that is an ethical decision. But remember, both sides are based on a couple of points. First point, all human life is valuable, because God created us in his image. And so every single human being has innate value. But let's also be honest, if there is no God, there's no basis for human value. If there is no God, I'm valuable because my culture tells me I'm valuable. I'm valuable because I tell myself I'm valuable. And if I'm not doing a very good job convincing myself that I'm valuable, then I feel like a piece of dirt. And if I happen to live in a culture that says, well, Cliff, your skin color is the wrong color, and you're not very smart, your GPA is not high enough, so too bad, you're a loser, well, then that's what I am, a loser. And according to Jesus Christ, there's no human being who's a loser. According to Christ, we all have equal value and dignity, because our value and dignity has nothing to do with what culture says, has nothing to do with what we say. It has everything to do with what God says. And he says, I made you in my image to reflect my character. That's what it means. To be created in the image or likeness of God means I was created to reflect the goodness, the love, the justice, the kindness of Almighty God.
So when I was in basic training, it's kind of it just felt absent. So everybody's kind of saying that it's unforgivable. So they just refuse to believe in a religion or Christianity or anything like that.
Okay, now you see, what Christ calls you to do is think through the issues carefully. Why are you concerned that murder might be wrong? I would argue you're concerned that murder or killing someone as a military figure is wrong because it's the ending of a human life. Okay, but then the obvious next question is, well, why is human life valuable? You see, sir, if there is no God, human life is a crapshoot. Human life is ultimately insignificant, except in the way that I give it significance. Well, that's great. But what happens if I'm a white racist? What happens if I'm an intellectual snob? And I say, you know, I'm more intelligent than you are, so I'm more valuable or significant than you are. And if there is no God, my opinion is just as valuable and accurate as your opinion. And your opinion is just as accurate and valuable as my opinion. And if we contradict each other, we got to realize it's all relative. So it really doesn't matter what we say and what we believe. In fact, to have a conversation where we disagree is really a waste of time, because everything, baby, is relative. No, you know better than that. You know that the issue of taking a human life involves some pretty intense, deep issues, significant issues. So you got to learn to think it through carefully, praying to God for wisdom. How do I make a decision on this? That issue for me is not that big, but I'll tell you the one that is big. What's the biggest killer of human life today? Starvation. Do you know that we have the solution for starvation? It's called money. It's called buying food. It's called getting that food to starving kids so you can put food in their mouth. Do you know what it's like for me? If I go up to this guy who's got a starving kid and I say, I'm a follower of Christ, and he says, oh, well, that's wonderful, Cliff. My kid is starving. And I say, well, you all have a good day, will you? Yeah, we know what that is. Stinking hypocrisy. I'm a hypocrite. If he's got a starving kid, I better get off my backside. I better make as much money as I can, and I better go out and buy food and feed his starving kid. So the obviously difficult ethical question is, how much money do I keep for myself and how much do I give away to feed starving children? And when you put your faith in Christ, you got to start thinking through that stuff. You got to start thinking, okay, I'm here at Texas State, I'm getting a good education, I'm going to have some great career potential, I'm going to be able to make some bucks. Now, when I make those bucks, how much am I going to keep for myself and how much am I going to give away to feed starving people in the name of Christ? So that's similar to your question you're asking, and it's the issue of human value, human dignity. And if you take God out of that picture, you're up a creek without a paddle when it comes to explaining to me why are human beings valuable. Stuart, what do you think?
Was the Roman centurion told by the Apostle Paul when he was saved, if you remember, the earthquake happened, this Roman centurion, tough blue-collar guy, he said, I need a miracle if I'm ever going to believe. Well, he got a miracle. A lot of people did not get a miracle in the Bible, and they never believed. Some did believe. He got a miracle. Did Paul then say, all right, now that you're saved, stop being a Roman centurion. Get out of the naval force. Do not be a police officer. No, Paul never said that. He upheld the military. The government did not wield the sword in vain. Paul said that when Nero was in power, by the way, who was lighting his gardens with the bodies of Christians. So tremendous respect for authority, and yet also challenging the authority at the same time. Was God sinning by saying that the Israelites should use just war at certain times in the Old Testament? Was God sinning by saying that? Going back against his own commandment to be pacifists? No, he was not sinning. God is perfect. Okay, so we see that there's obviously a place for it. Now, the temptation is to become the good old boys, the tough guys, and let's just go ahead and, again, dehumanize those who are in the Middle East, those who are in whatever part of the world. I met a very gifted sniper once in South Carolina. This guy could not get off alcohol and drugs, even when we were together, because he had so much guilt over sniping family members who were outside of the person, the terrorist that they were targeting. All right, so what had he started to do with his buddies? Dehumanize the group that they were after. So a Christian is never to dehumanize. A Christian is to understand all are created in God's image. Some people, all of us to an extent, some people more so than others, are horribly defaced because of the devil, because of flesh, because of our government even, different forces. But we're always to treat other people as though they are created in the image of God, because they truly are.
What's the hardest issue that just it makes it so difficult?
I would say maybe just the unforgivable action of taking another life in combat. It just, well, not just a single life. So let's say we have to maybe call field artillery and they strike a building and it just happen to be casualty. Like it feels like that's just an internal conflict that might be unforgivable.
Okay, but why are you in the armed forces then? If that's the big issue for you, why are you serving in the armed forces?
So I served in the armed forces, one, because I feel like that was the main call of my life. Like that's the only thing I've had a desire to do. And then there was also the not only that, but it's more of a family tradition to join the armed forces.
Okay. So I hope that you will question your family traditions the same way I had to. I grew up in a home where Jesus Christ was worshipped by mom and dad, but I couldn't believe in Jesus just because mom and dad did, right? Jesus is not the truth because mom and dad tell me he's the truth. Jesus is not the truth because a church tells me he's the truth. Something is true regardless of who believes in it or who disbelieves in it, because truth is reality. A big battleship was going through the night and it was foggy out. And all of a sudden they saw a signal down the water a bit, and the signal said, "Alter your course 10 degrees north." And the captain said, No. Tell them to alter their course 10 degrees south. And the signal came back, "Alter your course 10 degrees north." And the guy said, No, wait a second. Send back the message, "Alter your course 10 degrees south." I'm a battleship, knowing the fear that would strike into the oncoming boat's captain's heart. And to the shock and amazement of the admiral of that ship, that naval ship, the message came back, "Alter your course 10 degrees south. I am a lighthouse." See, truth exists separate from what I believe. And if I'm headed towards a rock, a lighthouse, I better alter my course and get in touch with reality. So Jesus Christ made this incredible claim, "I am the truth." Regardless of what mom and dad believe, regardless of what the church says, regardless of what your culture says, I am the truth. Now, he's either blowing smoke, he's either a liar, or else he's speaking the truth. And if he's speaking the truth, you and I want to be in touch with reality. And that's why putting your faith in him, if the evidence is he's reliable, is such a wise decision. And you see, I think the evidence of the way Jesus treated people, the evidence of his ethical teaching, the evidence of the way he died, loving and forgiving his enemies who were nailing him to a cross, and the evidence of the way he rose from the dead points to him being trustworthy. That's why for you to put your faith in Christ is not a leap into la-la land, fantasy land, or cultural bias or family bias. No, you're putting your faith in the real Jesus Christ, who is reliable and credible.
Like if I could put my faith in Christ and still have that occupation.
Well, I sure hope so.
That was my real concern.
Oh, you bet. Officers Christian Fellowship is one of the finest Christian fellowships in the United States, and it's all in the Navy and Army and Marines. Officers Christian, yeah, you can be a follower of Christ and serve in the armed forces, absolutely. Because God has instituted government to maintain justice and order in society. That's the primary first reason for government, to protect the innocent from being ripped off and slaughtered. So yes, you can be a follower of Christ, a genuine follower of Christ, and serve in the military, and you'll begin to discover that there are a whole slew of folks in the United States Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, who are deeply committed to Christ.
I grew up Jewish. I didn't find love within that community, and so I kind of just been on my own, researching on my own. So I would consider myself more of like a mystic than anything else. I believe God's name forever is I am. And I think that Jesus is buried within me. And I think that David is the son of God, and David represents humanity and the stench of humanity.
The typical student your age buys into something called moral therapeutic deism, which is moral, you set your own morality. What's true for you is true for you. What's true for me is true for me. Moral, therapeutic, God is my therapist. And so God is always there for me when I feel bad. And then deism, which is God is kind of aloof, he's kind of out there. So I think what we're trying to communicate is the typical person your age and below will say in the US, they'll say, that's kind of my definition of God. That's how God has revealed himself to me. And that's not like a selfish thing, but it's more so I want to define God as how I want to define him. And that has primarily been a pushback against church abuse. So I've been hurt in the church, so I want to be spiritual but not religious. And spiritual but not religious basically just means I don't like what's going on with the authority structure in the church. Too many people have misused God in general, and so now let's just go ahead and redefine God in our own terms.
Yeah, so it might be a little bit different. I think there is one core that, like, when you experience it the correct way, you experience it that way. But I think that.
But what's the correct way if it's all our own personal experience? There's no correct way.
You got me.
It wasn't a gotcha moment.
I don't know. I think that I'm very close to God, and I think I experience God, and to me, it's like, yeah, God won't shut up in my life. Like, it's
That's
all
awesome.
around
Yeah.
me. Yeah. So I don't really know. I think it's something you feel, and and maybe that goes back to your point where you say it's so individualized, and maybe that's not the best way. But
did Jesus reveal himself in name as a human being? Did God punch a hole through space and time to reveal himself as a person? It's kind of like Shakespeare and Hamlet. Did Shakespeare write himself into the play as Hamlet? And you can get to know Hamlet. Hamlet's a real person that Shakespeare is trying to reveal to us. Well, is that who Jesus is and was? And if not, if he just said, I'm a floating spirit or I'm a mushroom, many people believe Jesus was just a mushroom. Joe Rogan believed that for the longest time. So maybe he was. Or are the Gospels reliable historically? And were the Gospels, like so many of the great literary critics like C.S. Lewis talked about, they are written as nonfiction. If they were written as fiction, you could just say, well, it's written as fiction, make up Jesus, decide whoever Jesus is on your own terms, and it's your own experience. But I think the Gospels as historical documents and Jesus as a historical figure, who 98.9% of scholars believe across our nation was a historical figure, well, if he revealed himself in a certain way and said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me, I think the experience, like you said, is beautiful and very important, but now we have to contend with, well, is that true? Is he really who he said he was as the only way?
there's a lot of symbolism in the Bible, and it goes a lot deeper. Like, for example, you say he was nailed to the cross, right? I believe that, but I also believe maybe there is like a ecstasy around it, like Jesus was being nailed to us, opposed to just being nailed to the cross. That's why Jesus is within us.
Okay, so you believe, though, that there are different genres in the Bible. Apocalyptic literature, historical narrative, poetry, song.
A love story, for sure.
You're going to interpret based off of genre. You're not going to go look at apocalyptic literature and say, oh, this is historical narrative. So when the book of Revelation, for example, talks about this three-headed monster, Well, you're not going to look at that and say, oh, there's a three-headed monster running around rampant the Roman Empire. No, there's more metaphor, there's more apocalyptic genre. But then you have Jesus being nailed to a cross. I mean, any historian worth his salt would say, yes, that actually happened. And that's one of the biggest defeaters against my Muslim friends. My Muslim friends would say, no, Jesus did not die on a cross. Well, they're going to have to contend with the history and evidence behind he did die on a cross. So I don't know, that would be my pushback there. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because if I'm just going to say, oh, it's all a metaphor, well, I better treat all my textbooks that way then. Science, as well as history here at this fine university. But I don't think you would do that, right? Or because you would fail in just about every class if you did.
I will say, I agree that it is historical, even though that's so contradicting. I want to believe,
How is it contradicting?
Because I'm over here saying that it's metaphors and it's symbolism, but I'm also like, it could be historical, so I am contradicting myself, but.
Well, I love that you take Jesus seriously. And the beauty about Christianity is you can get to know a person who claims to be God, who is, we believe is God, actually wanting a personal relationship with us. If you go to Hinduism, for example, there's going to be no personal relationship. There's definitely going to be no grace and forgiveness. And there's definitely not going to be an understanding of sin. There's always just going to be karma, and you messed up, and sorry, if you're dying of cancer right now, it was something you did in your previous life. But I think what Jesus says when it comes to grace and justice, yes, we mess up often, and oftentimes consequences follow, but there's also grace. And so for me, I would just say you're going to have to throw out the Bible if you're going to say we can conceptualize Jesus any old way we want to.
You've always heard that, like, you know, God's creation, we are God's creation, and all of that. Well, if we are God's creation, why would God create you in a way where then he can turn back to you and say, well, you're sinning. Why are you doing this to me?
Great question. You and I are not robots. We're human beings and created in the image of God, which partially means we have a free will, which means I can pull out my wallet if this guy's hungry. Aren't you so glad you sat here today? Oh, yeah. Yeah, oh, yeah. And I can give him my wallet and tell him go out and get dinner. Or I can take my hand that God has given me, and instead of pulling out money to give it to him, I can roll it into a fist and send it crashing into his handsome face. God makes me do neither, but he will judge me if I choose to roll my hand into a fist and send it crashing into his handsome face, because that is a perversion of the gift of a hand that God gave me, in stark contrast to pulling out of my wallet to give him money because he's hungry. That is good. Smacking him is evil. So God chose to partially limit his power by giving me a free will, which means if I choose to haul back and slam him in the face, he's not going to put plexiglass right here, and my hand is going to reverberate and recoil after I hit the plexiglass. But there's coming a day of judgment when God will hold me responsible for the way I exercise my free will.
It does make sense, because I've heard people, like, you know, tell me, oh, well, you know, we're not, you know, under the total influence of God, and we still have, like, freedom per se. But I just always wondered, like, you know, so, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, did he give us that freedom knowing we would sin? And basically, like, yeah, that's basically my question. Or did he expect us to, like, just be completely, like, sinless?
No, he gives us a free will, calls us to be responsible. I've been irresponsible. That is my sin. My sin is, I think I got a better way to be happy. I think I got a better way to live my life than God's way. In other words, God, in spite of the fact that you're all-knowing and all-loving, I got a better way. I think I know what's best for Cliff. And God says, whoa, slow down, Cliff. I'm all-knowing and I'm all-loving. You can trust me. And now I got to make a decision. Am I going to trust God? Or am I going to trust Cliff ultimately to define right and wrong, to define the purpose of my sexuality, to define the purpose of my money? Every area of life. Does God know better than I do, or do I know better than God? In many ways, it just comes down to that simple statement. Do I know better than God, or does God know better than me the best way to be happy, to be fulfilled, to be satisfied in life? And I think, especially when I'm in university, around the tender ages of 18 to 23, that having sex with anybody who wants to have sex with me, consensual sex, is by far the best way to be happy. And Jesus Christ says, no, Cliff, you're wrong. Because when you have sex outside of the context of a lifelong commitment, you're trivializing yourself and you're trivializing your sex partner. And guess what, Cliff? A woman is not just a good-looking pair of legs. A woman is not a 10 or an 8 or a 6 or a 2. No, that is a totally false view of womanhood. A woman is a precious human being created in the image of God, which means you better learn to respect her, Cliff, as a woman, not as a hunk of meat on a hoof.
Another thing I've been thinking about is like, well, in that process, how do you prevent yourself from, falling into a trap of the Bible or the Word of God being weaponized against society? Because we saw it in your early European history
Yes.
with the mandate of heaven, and even with the United States with manifest destiny.
Yep.
Like they had a mandate from heaven to do this. When in reality, how does that make sense?
Sir, the answer to your question is so simple, but it's very disturbing. I can't answer your question. You got to go do your homework. You got to read the Bible for yourselves, because you're absolutely correct. People are going to use the Bible to weaponize their opinion and to slam you into the ground. And that's tragic. That is evil, it's wrong, but you're right, sir. It's been done for thousands of years. Don't buy into it. Instead, read the Bible for yourself. Ask God to give you wisdom. Apply the scriptures to your life, and don't use it as a weapon, because that has been done, and it's sick and tragic. But remember, nuclear energy has been used to blow Hiroshima and Nagasaki off the map. It doesn't mean that nuclear energy is all bad, just because it's abused. And there's a lot of stuff that's been abused. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Drugs. There's some bad drugs. You can get hooked and become an addict. Or there's some use of good drugs, where a doctor will medicate you and you will be a lot healthier as a result of drugs. So don't get turned off by religious hypocrisy. Reject it. Reject it when people weaponize their faith and use it to justify slamming people in the ground. That's evil, flat out. And Christ attacked those people in the Gospels. You're a delight to talk to. I like the way you think.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it so much.
Wait, just 1 second. Stuart, what do you have to say to this gentleman?
I buttered my bread yesterday, stuck it in the toaster. I could have used that butter knife to have stuck it in my dad, or he could have stuck it in me. Depends where we're at in our relationship. No, but you get my point. I mean, a butter knife is meant to butter bread, and if it's not, then it's being abused for its purpose, as well as Beethoven, very gifted, and if you play Beethoven poorly, doesn't make Beethoven somehow a horrible artist. Just like Jesus Christ. And what I find so interesting is Jesus came with the towel more than any other spiritual leader, not even close. Jesus came with self-sacrifice, not self-assertion. In our culture today, it's about your life for mine. Jesus says it's my life for yours. And that has shaped Judeo-Christian values down through our nation's history. The scary part is that's kind of being taken away. The revival that I see with your guys' generation, fortunately, is bringing it back. But if you remove Judeo-Christian values based off of the spiritual leader who brought the towel, now all of a sudden you're going to see forgiveness disappear. We talked about sin. You're going to see sin disappear. You're going to see commitment. See, to your sexual question earlier, the thing I see in my town that's concerning to me is open marriages and key parties. I've been invited before. I said no. And I think that's very important for people to say no. Because some people think it's just spicing up the marriage. No, it's communicating to your children that you could care less about your spouse and commitment. But Jesus Christ came, unlike any other spiritual leader, and said there's something called a covenant that you strike with a spouse where you say, till death do us part. And this is before God. And so you lose the moral bearings of our society when the church loses its moral authority done right through Jesus' teachings and who he was. The church done right was in the Roman Empire When all the big plagues hit in the 300s and 400s AD, the Christians were the only ones who were leaving the suburban areas, going down into the urban areas, giving up their own lives because they caught the plague themselves, trying to bring others out of the cities to the suburbs to save their lives. Okay, that's what Christ taught, all about sacrifice. So whenever you see any type of abuse in the name of Christ, you just got to call it what it is. But if there wasn't this Jesus Christ who existed, who all of a sudden made it cool to be kind and self-sacrificial, I don't know where we'd be as a society or as a world.
Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode. Like and hit that subscribe button in order to join the family. Also want to invite you to our church where we pastor at in New Canaan, Connecticut. It's called Grace Community Church. We are currently meeting at a middle school, Saxe Middle School, and we start at 9:30 a.m. Hope to meet you there. See you soon.